Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallama ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. The question that is guiding this lesson is logic permissible? We've seen that in order to answer this question, we need to first understand its terms. In the first two lessons, we focused on understanding the first term, logic. We studied the meaning of logic, and then we learned about the difference between Aristotelian and Islamic logic. In this lesson, we'll focus on the second term, namely permissible. And the guiding question of this final sub-lesson is, what is permissibility? Permissibility arises from the moral responsibility of human beings to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The word moral responsibility, Arabic at-taklif, is the key word. The moral responsibility of human beings, taklif, arises from God addressing them regarding the performance or non-performance of their actions in one of 5 ways. Let's take some specific examples to make this clearer. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He addressed us, He addressed human beings with, for example, strict commands. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in the Quran, Aqimus salah, establish the prayer. This is a strict command regarding one of our actions, namely the action of prayer. This strict command regarding the human action of prayer makes it obligatory for us to pray. What it means for the command to be strict is that we must do it. If we don't do it, we deserve punishment, and if we do it, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of His generosity, will reward us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also addresses us with lenient commands. For example, through the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he told us that it is recommended for us to perform the bath on the day of Friday. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, "Man tawadda'a yawm al-jumu'ati fabiha wa ni'mat, wa man ightasala fal-ghuslu afdal," which means that whoever does wudu on the day of Friday, then he's taken a dispensation and has taken an excellent dispensation. He's done an excellent thing. But whoever takes a bath, then taking a bath is better than doing wudu. This is a lenient command to perform a bath on the day of Friday. It's lenient because if someone does not do it, they haven't done something bad. But if they do it, then they've done something good. This is a lenient command, a divine address regarding a human action, namely performing ghusl, taking a purificatory bath on the day of Friday. This lenient command regarding the human action of taking a bath makes that action recommended. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also addresses us with the divine address of permission, and this is the divine address that concerns us in this lesson, in which we are investigating the meaning of permissibility. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in the Quran, He says, "Kulu washrabu wa la tusrifu." He says, eat and drink. Go ahead, eat. Go ahead, drink. But don't be excessive. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He says, go ahead, eat, go ahead, drink, this is a divine address regarding the human actions of eating and drinking, and it, by virtue of this divine address, those actions of eating and drinking become permissible. There are similar divine addresses that make human actions offensive or prohibited. So for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He through the action of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, He taught us that it is offensive to talk after the Isha prayer. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, hadith in Bukhari, it's mentioned that كان يكره النوم قبل العشاء والحديث بعده. that he used to dislike sleeping before the Isha prayer, because one might miss the Isha prayer. One should pray the Isha prayer and then sleep. And he used to dislike talking after it. He would go to sleep early. This is a lenient prohibition regarding the human action of talking after Isha or sleeping before it, and it makes those actions offensive. And finally, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says in the Quran, he says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu taqullaha wa dharu ma baqiya min ar-riba in kuntum mu'minin. He says that, O you who believe, fear Allah and leave whatever remains of interest that's due on the loans that you have given. So this is a strict prohibition regarding the human action of taking interest on loans that one has given out, and it makes that action, the action of taking interest on loans, it makes it prohibited. So what is permissibility? Permissibility is a description of the action of a morally responsible agent, a human being or one of the jinn. These are the two morally responsible agents. So the action of eating and the action of drinking is described as being permissible. But something that is not a human action cannot be described as being permissible, just as it cannot be described as being obligatory or recommended or offensive or unlawful. These 5 descriptions are descriptions of human actions. Something that is not a human action cannot be described as with one of these 5 descriptions. So for example, it's technically inaccurate to say that wine is unlawful, is prohibited, or that pork is prohibited. What's prohibited is not the wine nor the pork, but what is prohibited is a particular human action with respect to wine, a particular human action with respect to pork. What is prohibited is the human action of drinking with respect to wine, and the human action of eating with respect to pork. What is permissible is the human action of eating and the human action of drinking with respect to apples, eating apples, or drinking water. Permissibility is a description of the action of a morally responsible agent. We now understand that what permissibility is, and we understand that the human action becomes permissible when God gives permission to perform it. That's how an action, it becomes permissible. So if we return now to the question that has been guiding this series of 3 sub-lessons, we now understand the meaning of permissibility. And in previous lessons, we have understood the meaning of logic. And so we're now ready to address the question, is logic permissible? But if you've been following carefully this lesson, then you will notice a problem. The problem is that logic is not a human action. Logic is the rules of correct reasoning. So logic cannot be described as being permissible or unlawful or obligatory or recommended. But it's only some human action with respect to logic that can be given one of these descriptions. So we need to modify the question. So how do we modify it? Let's think of some human actions. So one could ask, is studying logic permissible? Studying logic is now a human action. Is using logic permissible? This is now a human action. This question is correct. Is teaching logic permissible? Teaching is a human action. Let's take the first option, studying logic. Since we're taking a course in logic and we're about to study it, this is the question that makes most sense. This is what we're going to do. So we want to find out whether or not studying logic is permissible. So we've seen already many times that in order to answer this question, we need to know the meanings of the terms. We know the meaning of studying. We know the meaning of logic. We had 2 long lessons on the meaning of logic. And we know the meaning of permissibility. And so we're now ready to answer the question, is studying logic permissible? But I'm not going to answer the question because I've given you enough information in this lesson and the previous 2 lessons for you to figure out the answer yourself. So I want you to think about what you've learned and figure out the answer to this question. Make an argument for whether you think logic is permissible or whether logic is impermissible. But when you make your argument, then make sure that you use logic in your argument, because logic, as we know, is the rules of correct reasoning. So the only way that you know that your argument is sound and it's a correct argument is by using the rules of logic. And so that's your assignment for this first lesson. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.